Hello. There's lots of people in this audience that I know, but also a few new faces. So for those who don't know me, I'm Dr. Kate O'Shaughnessy. I'm the Head of Research at the Perth US Asia Centre, and we are really delighted to welcome all of you to this really important conversation this afternoon about Australia's cyber affairs, the threats facing the country and the state, and how we can work together to confront them. Before we start, it's really important that we acknowledge that we're meeting on beautiful Whadjuk Noongar land, and I would like to invite Manny Richardson to give the acknowledgement of country.
My name is Manny Richardson. I'm an Amungul man from the Southern Yamatji Nation. Amungul Willinyu, meaning people of the water, from my coastal town of Geraldton. Surrounded by 2 rivers and a hill range, my people relied heavily on the sea for their resources and storytelling. I'm a second-year student here at UWA, studying a Bachelor of Biomedicine and an active member of St. Catherine's College in the Danju Darbalung program. We are gathered today on Whadjuk Bujar, which belongs to the Whadjuk Noongar people. We are surrounded by beautiful country with the Derribul Yerrigan, Swan River to the southeast, and Kargarup, Kings Park to the northeast. This evening, I respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the country we meet upon, the Whadjuk Noongar people. And I am honoured to be in such a position to recognise and thank the land and its people we can thrive alongside. I reverently give thanks to the past and current elders who keep the fire burning, guiding future generations to continue tradition and culture. Thank you.
Manny, thank you for acknowledging so beautifully where we're meeting, and thank you for your time, because I know you're preparing for exams, and spare time for students preparing for exams is not in good supply, so thank you. Before we start, I do want to acknowledge that we've got lots of dignitaries in the room. Can I acknowledge, of course, the Chancellor of UWA, Diane Smith-Gander. Thanks for your support, Chancellor, and for joining us at this really important event. And we are very grateful to the University of Western Australia for your steadfast support for the Centre. Can I acknowledge as well our corporate partners and sponsors in the room, representatives of Austal, Woodside, Rio Tinto, the Government of Western Australia, as well as representatives of the Western Australian Consular Corps. We're joined in total by about 150 people. I think we've got some of you in the room and a really big contingent online. So we're really glad to be bringing this conversation to people that are located outside of Perth. In a moment, we're going to welcome the Ambassador for Cyber Affairs and Critical Technology, Brendan Dowling, for his keynote speech. Brendan was appointed to this role in May 2023. As Ambassador for Cyber Affairs and Critical Technology, he leads Australia's international engagement on cyber affairs and critical technology issues, whilst delivering cyber capacity building, crisis response and resilience across the Indo-Pacific. He has a really distinguished career in cyber affairs, holding a number of senior roles in the Department of Home Affairs, including serving at the Australian Embassy in Washington, DC, where he led engagement across the Americas region on national security, cyber security, critical technology, criminal justice, emergency management and immigration and border functions. We're going to have the opportunity to have some question and answer with Brendan after his remarks, but for now, Brendan, can I invite you to the podium?
Let me check. I've got a mic here, but I think this probably will do the job. I'll start with just an explanation for why we have an ambassador for cyber affairs and technology. Essentially, Australia recognised back in 2017 that our security, our prosperity, our presence in the global digital world was shaped by forces outside of our nation. Those forces are the design of the technology that we use every day in business, in our personal lives, which are often designed, manufactured, developed by companies outside of Australia, in the US primarily, in Europe and in China. And we have a responsibility to our people to shape what that technology looks like, because that technology shapes their lives. We're also subject to the forces of geopolitics that are playing out in the cyber domain that I'll talk to more in a few minutes. That means we need to represent our national interests in the global digital world in the same way that we represent them to a foreign country or to a multilateral institution like the UN. So back in 2017, it seemed like a slightly weird concept to have an ambassador to cyberspace, but these days it's actually very common. Probably about 50 plus countries around the world have the equivalent of my role, and all governments recognise how important the global digital world is to the health, safety, well-being, security of their people and their nations. So we come in 2025 to a lot of dynamics that are shaping the trajectory of our nation, and I think a lot of dynamics that are playing out in Western Australia in particular. For a place that for a Easterner like me can feel a long way away, this is actually at the centre of so many geostrategic developments globally, whether it's the AUKUS capability, whether it's critical minerals, whether it's our general resource production out of the state. But the strategic circumstances in which we all live are more complicated than they have ever been in my lifetime, and are only getting more challenging, more difficult to interpret and understand, and more consequential to what the next 5, 10, 15 years of our global security looks like. The Foreign Minister Penny Wong describes us as being in a state of permanent contest in the Indo-Pacific. A lot of that contest is playing out in the digital world. What I'll talk through is why what happens in the digital world matters for our broader politics, our broader security, for your lives, for the lives of your businesses, of your families, why it matters not in a technical sense, but in a geopolitical sense. So for those of you who were worried or excited about hearing a lot of technical talk about cyber, that's not what this is. To my great relief, probably to your great relief, this is about how technology shapes the world in which we live. It's axiomatic that we've created a world where everything is connected. Everything is digital, from our social interactions to our access to government services, to the critical infrastructure that we rely on for power, food, water, transactions that we conduct to buy our coffee. Everything is digitally connected, and that has brought tremendous benefits, economic growth, e-commerce opportunities, efficiency opportunities, but it is a world that is inherently vulnerable. So as we have spread digital technologies through every aspect of our lives, we have also spread the vulnerabilities that digital technology brings. We have created a world where we didn't think about those vulnerabilities in the design and deployment of the technology. I think a fundamental issue which has led us to the insecure digital world in which we live is that the people who think about technology don't think about geopolitics, and the people who think about geopolitics don't think about technology. So over the last 30 years or so, we've had technology, be it enterprise software, be it email systems, be it Internet of Things devices where we've connected our cars, our fridges, our watches, our toothbrushes to the internet, all have been designed largely thinking about functionality and speed to market. Across the board, that technology hasn't been designed thinking about the security of the technology. That means all of those technologies are pretty easy to exploit. Now, the way they're exploited is the subject of much deeper cybersecurity conversations, but it's the intent to exploit that matters for geopolitics. I'm going to talk through a number of trends that are playing out today that are taking advantage of the vulnerabilities in our digital world to try and demonstrate why this matters to all of us. This will all sound pretty pessimistic, sound like a lot of bad news for the coming few years, but rest assured I will come to what we in Australia are doing about it, how we are shaping the dynamics in the region around digital security, technology security, and why the choices we make today can actually build out a more secure and stable region. So in the last decade, we have managed to create, in the way that we've designed technology, an entirely new crime type that is incredibly lucrative and sophisticated. Cybercrime has grown from a relatively niche type of cottage industry to now being worth billions and billions of dollars annually. Cybercrime, in which you conduct long-distance attacks accessing vulnerabilities in someone's computer, in their Internet of Things devices, in their digital data, really only became possible with the advent of cryptocurrency, because you need to extract a ransom, a payment from your basement in Russia, which is where most cybercriminals are operating from, in a way that doesn't leave a digital footprint that allows you to be tracked back. Cryptocurrency enabled that to happen. What we have now is cybercriminal groups operating what is an industry. Ransomware attacks, a term that probably wasn't familiar to most Australians about 3 years ago, have hit tens of millions of Australians who are affected by the Medibank attack and by the subsequent ransomware attacks that have hit the nation. Ransomware, if you wanted to conduct a ransomware attack and you felt that you didn't have the technical know-how, you can access on a forum on the dark web or sometimes on the clear web, where you can get in touch and say, I want to target this person, this entity, this organisation. Someone will help you with the software tools. They will help you conduct the attack. They will connect you with someone who will then sell the data or offer the data for sale that has been stolen, and basically conduct the entire operation on your behalf for a 20% cut, which can be super lucrative. So for those of you who wanted to get into ransomware but were worried you didn't have the technical ability, the information and the services are out there. Obviously, deeply illegal, deeply problematic for our safety and security, but that is the state that the ransomware industry has got to today. What we've seen in the last few years, we're all familiar with the attack on Medibank. 10 million Australians had their information compromised. You might be familiar with attacks like the Colonial Pipeline in the United States, which shut off fuel supply to the southeastern kind of quadrant of the US. What we're seeing is ransomware attackers are realizing that that's actually bad for business. Attacking big cyber superpowers, launching attacks that affect tens of millions of people, trying to extract ransoms in the realm of $5 million, $10 million. It's kind of bad for business because you invite too much attention. So what we're seeing is an evolution in their tradecraft, and they're targeting schools, hospitals, childcare centres, local governments. They're targeting those entities in Australia. They're targeting the smaller Pacific Island nations, countries like Palau, FSM, with populations not much larger than this university campus, are being targeted by Russian cyber criminals who see that the way to make money is high volume of attacks, even if the ransom is low. You target where you have leverage. You target a hospital because a hospital is worried about people dying if they don't have access to their data or their systems. So they pay the ransom as the quickest way to unlock it. You target a childcare centre because they don't have the money to secure a good cybersecurity firm. So we're seeing ransomware get increasingly problematic, target the most vulnerable. We're seeing more sophisticated cyber tools in the hands of a broader range of actors. We used to think of there being primarily 4 nation states that had the most sophisticated cyber tools and use them for malicious purposes in Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China. Now we see that those types of sophisticated cyber tools are in the hands of a much broader range of actors. You can buy exploits online. You can buy services from people who will help you launch an attack. I talked about criminal groups using those types of tools, but actually a much broader range of nation states are using those tools and buying them on the commercial market as well. We see spyware being used against dissidents in the Middle East. We see tools that are used to suppress political speech, to access information and data about citizens of their country being used by governments more commonly. So there is a much broader range of actors with access to the most sophisticated cyber tools. It is extremely difficult for us to lay a glove on the perpetrators using these types of tools for malicious purposes. You know, with the Medibank attack, we finally managed to impose sanctions against the individual responsible for the attack and also for the people who hosted the servers that enabled the attack to occur. That took 18 months to identify with confidence the perpetrator behind that work. AFP and the Australian Signals Directorate invested huge amounts of time and energy to track down the actors behind the attack. Applying sanctions is a really useful step to expose the activities of that person, to de-anonymise them. Cyber criminals rely on I shouldn't use that word, it's so hard to say. They obscure their identity. By exposing them, sanctioning them in partnership with the UK and the US, we have made their lives more difficult. It's really challenging to do that, and it's really challenging to see someone locked up and put behind bars for those types of crime types. So we need to get better at that. We need to invest more resources and energy, but we need more international partners to take that crime type seriously as well. At the moment, you can operate as a cyber criminal with impunity in a lot of jurisdictions around the world. Some of the other malicious cyber activity we're worried about. North Korea, the DPRK, has an incredibly sophisticated ecosystem of cyber companies and individuals. They have deployed that capability to steal money from central banks in Bangladesh. They've targeted banks in our region. And in the last couple of years, they have very successfully targeted crypto exchanges, stealing tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of crypto. Now, as you might expect, crypto exchanges are not really minded to deal with governments. The whole idea of crypto is operating a shadow currency outside the world of government regulation, which means when they are exposed and subject to these types of attacks, we don't have the same connections, we don't have the same network that we might have with the traditional banking network to better protect them. Why does that matter? Who cares if crypto bros have their balances stolen? It matters because the North Koreans are using that money to fund their ballistic missiles program and their nuclear weapons program. So extremely problematic for the security of this region. We often wonder, what's the nightmare scenario when it comes to cyber attacks? What's the cyber Pearl Harbor, as they talk about in the US? What are the things that would really keep us up at night when it comes to cyber attacks? We've already seen that. We've already seen that in the way that Russia has used cyber capabilities against Ukraine. Now, we'd all know that Russia has used cyber attacks as a fully integrated part of its campaign, its invasion against Ukraine over the last couple of years. It continues to subject Ukraine to relentless cyber attacks on its civilian infrastructure, on its government systems, on its defence systems. But the nightmare scenario that I want to take you back to was actually in 2017 in what's known as the NotPetya attacks. In this situation, Russia, which had been conducting aggressive activities against Ukraine for a number of years by this point, decided it wanted to punish Ukraine around some protests against, which had involved the tearing down of some Soviet-era statues. It decided it wanted to punish Ukraine comprehensively. It wanted to show Ukraine that it could shut down its functions, its society, its economic activity. How did it do it? It targeted accounting software used by small businesses, by government agencies, by family businesses, by schools, basically the equivalent of MYOB or Zero in the Ukrainian context. Why target accounting software? because it's a soft underbelly. No one thinks about, well, we better secure our accounting software because that's valuable. People think about securing their data, they think about securing their defense systems. But accounting software that is ubiquitously used was an incredibly effective way to target Ukraine. And what happened was this malware spread throughout Ukrainian society and shut it down. Shut down businesses, shut down transactions, shut down transport, shut down shops, schools, government agencies. So if you want to launch a catastrophic, disabling cyber attack against another country, you don't launch it against the Defence Department, you launch it against an easy target which is ubiquitously used through their system. Now, of course, some of you might know malware is difficult to control in a globally connected world. So what happened with that attack is NotPetya, the malware used in that situation, then spread beyond Ukraine. It affected hospitals in the UK. It affected the Cadbury factory in Tasmania. It shut down Maersk, the Danish shipping firm, and who lost tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. So that type of catastrophic cyber attack that cascades through a country and has a disabling effect on the ability of people to lose their lives, to live their lives, is not an abstract theoretical risk. It is a risk that we have already seen play out. Now, when we look at this region and the security of this region, China features prominently. China is a very capable cyber actor, and I want to run through a couple of examples of where we, from the Australian government, have publicly called out cyber activities emanating out of China that represent a particular concern to us. APT 40, Advanced Persistent Threat Actor 40, kind of cyber nomenclature for a cyber group. We have publicly attributed to APT 40, a group associated with the Chinese Ministry of State Security, penetration of Australian government levels at Australian government agencies at different levels of government. Highly active information gathering, data gathering in Australia. The reason we publicly attributed those activities is because we know how active this group is. We know that they are targeting businesses, organisations, government agencies, not only in Australia, but in our region. When we issued that advisory, we co-sealed it with Five Eye partners, but we also co-sealed it with Japan and Korea, who recognise how extensive the activities of APT 40 are in the region. Subsequently, Samoa has issued a public attribution of APT 40's penetration of Samoan government networks. So when we're talking about Chinese-backed malicious cyber activity, we're not just talking about targeting big end of town, big government agencies. We're talking about much more pervasive activity that hits a country the size of Samoa, because Samoa has strategic significance in our region. We also see continued theft of commercial IP, which is particularly relevant to a state like WA, where you have incredibly innovative research, where you have really valuable intellectual property around things like the processing of critical minerals, around biotechnology, around AUKUS-related technologies. This is a sustained, comprehensive campaign that is run to continue to steal intellectual property from Australia, countries in the region, including in this state. Late last year, the US attributed to a group known as Salt Typhoon, operating out of China, extensive penetration of US telecommunications networks, probably to an extent that we hadn't realised that group was capable of. This is extensive penetration requiring the use of really high-scale, large-scale cyber workforces to conduct these types of attacks. That sort of penetration is likely occurring elsewhere. I do want to talk about a group called Volt Typhoon, which we've publicly attributed as well as being associated largely with the Chinese PLA. The reason why Volt Typhoon represents such an interesting and concerning story for us is that Volt Typhoon has been identified as pre-positioning on civilian critical infrastructure. What that means in layman's terms is accessing a network and sitting there for 6 months, a year, 2 years, waiting to activate your capability. What's worrying about the activities of Volt Typhoon is that the pre-positioning is happening on operational networks, operational technology that operates things like industrial control systems, water, sanitation, power, electricity. What's concerning is that a lot of the activities we've monitored around China's capability have been about espionage and information gathering. There's no useful data or information on an operational technology network. The worry is that that type of pre-positioning is done for the purposes of disruption of civilian infrastructure. Going back to that nightmare scenario, what are we worried about? The services that we rely on every day being disrupted or disabled by a malicious cyber actor who can activate their capability when they decide they want to have the most effect. Again, a real risk that is facing not just us, but the world today. So what does the next 5 years look like in a cyber sense? It gets more problematic, it gets more conflicted, it gets more complicated. More actors, more capability, and importantly, our efforts, Australia's very active efforts to advocate for global rules around the use of cyber capabilities are being tested. So Australia has long considered that international law applies in cyberspace. It's not the Wild West. If you launch a cyber attack that has the equivalent effect of a kinetic attack, i.e., if you shut down a hospital in the same way that a missile would shut down a hospital, then we consider those things to be equivalent, i.e., you can't do it. We worked really hard to establish norms of responsible behaviour in cyberspace, which have been agreed by the UN by consensus back in 2017. One of those norms holds that states should not use cyber tools to target civilian critical infrastructure. That remains a crucial global norm. We cannot have civilian services being targeted and attacked in cyberspace by actors who think they can hide behind digital layers of obfuscation. Are those norms holding? It looks problematic when you look at the way Russia's used cyber capabilities against Ukraine. It looks problematic when you look at the type of activities we're identifying Volt Typhoon as conducting in the region. So if those norms of responsible state behaviour continue to be transgressed and tested, it looks like a more dangerous world in cyberspace in coming years. At the same time as the use of digital technologies only gets more ubiquitous, what we call the attack surface continues to expand. Those issues around security by design are not necessarily getting better in a global technology sense, so the vulnerabilities spread. In Australia, we are a world-leading country when it comes to cyber resilience. Successive governments have prioritised building the resilience of our government networks, of our critical infrastructure, and our broad cyber capability. So we've got a really good story to tell. We've got a lot of challenges that we continue to face, but we have passed things like the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act that says you must invest in the hardening and preparedness of your critical infrastructure networks. A couple of years ago, the government launched the 2023 to 2030 cybersecurity strategy, a genuinely world-leading strategy that will position us to have better security across the technology stack, from IoT devices to government agencies to workforce. All will be stronger as a result of that strategy. But there's a lot of work still to do. My focus as part of that strategy is how do we build up the resilience of the region. We live in a region whose security is our security, but that is a region where a lot of developing countries in the Pacific and Southeast Asia are looking to adopt digital technologies for development and economic reasons. It's potentially life-changing for tens of millions of people throughout this region. However, they are often making the choice between affordability and security when it comes to technology. And I don't think anyone begrudges them from choosing affordable technology to get access for their people. What that means if you're compromising on security, though, is that you're more vulnerable to attacks. We have a rapid response capability to assist Pacific Island nations who are subject to disruptive cyber attacks. We've used that 9 times in the last 18 months. That means we have put people on planes to go out to Pacific Islands to help them recover from a massive cyber attack that has disrupted critical government functions or critical infrastructure like telcos or the banking system. That is too frequent a level of activity. That becomes really problematic if we continue to see that tempo of attacks in the Pacific. In Southeast Asia, we've seen Indonesia's 2 government data centres shut down by ransomware actors. In the Philippines, around South China Sea issues, we've seen China launch attacks against Filipino government agencies. We've seen critical infrastructure like the Mekong River Commission, like central banks being targeted in the region. We are out there and we are helping those countries build up their resilience and respond to those attacks. That work is only getting more urgent. The good news is we have pretty strong capability. Australia's made this a core part of our foreign policy agenda in the region. It will continue to be so. And we're generally a trusted actor when we get out there and we assist countries to build up their resilience, to learn from our legislation, to actually have Australian cybersecurity companies out there helping harden their networks. All of that remains crucial. And on the global multilateral side of things, we continue to advocate for states to adhere to the norms of responsible state behaviour. We've negotiated a new cybercrime convention that will likely be signed later this year to create a framework for more international cooperation to combat cybercrime. And we'll continue to advocate through the UN system for states to adhere to those norms and to abide by international law when it comes to cyberspace. So there's a lot of cause to be worried about what the future of digital technologies and our digital world looks like, but we have taken a very strong leadership role from this country that is respected and admired by other countries in the region and increasingly serves as a model for the region to build up its security. So I will leave it there.
Brendan, thank you for worrying us all. I know the audience is looking forward to diving a bit deeper into all of those issues. I wanted to introduce your fellow panellist, Alana Ford, who is the Senior Fellow at the Perth US Asia Centre. Alana brings incredible experience to the centre, serving most recently at the Australian Embassy in Washington, DC as well, leading a suite of really complicated pieces of work, including negotiating with tech companies on online harms and criminal exploitation of online platforms. So she comes to us ready for a challenge. Today's discussion is going to be on all of the difficult issues. So I'm going to come and join the panel now and pose a few of the questions that we had pre-submitted, and then we'll open it up to the audience for some more discussion. And the challenge is to see if I can make this work. Brendan, I know you've just been speaking for a little while, and so indulge me if I ask you to speak for a little bit longer. I really wanted to dive a bit deeper into this question of intellectual property theft. The Australian Strategic Policy Institute has this really awesome critical tech tracker on all the areas on which China is leading, bits of AI and quantum and hypersonics. Can you just, as much as you're able to, talk with the audience a bit about why that's really a risk for Australian companies and businesses?
Yeah, look, I think the strategic advantage in coming years when it comes to geopolitics will be built on a bedrock of technology. So there's a lot of hype around emerging technologies. It's hard to know what's true and what's kind of promotional hype when it comes to artificial intelligence. But when you look at the investments that the US and China are both making in AI data center capability, cutting edge chips, which position them at the forefront of the race for AI, it shows that those countries think that who dominates AI, who positions themselves at the forefront of quantum computing, will have incredible strategic advantages in the coming future. And I think that's right. if you dominate the technology stack, if you dominate the cables, the telecommunications, the data centres, the cloud computing, these, to say they're foundational infrastructure to our contemporary digital world, I think understates how important they are. So whoever dominates that technology gets incredible political and economic power. And that's why you see the world's largest economies investing a huge amount of money, resourcing, effort, innovation into technologies like artificial intelligence and like quantum, which are two sort of areas where I think the race is there to be won. When you talk about IP theft, in winning strategic advantage, I think what we've seen is a willingness by states to kind of break the rules. And I think it's well established how comprehensive I think China's efforts at IP theft have been. Has that positioned China to lead on those technologies? It's hard to say. It's without a doubt a contributor. But I think what we've underestimated for many years is how valuable the work that we do in research institutes, in universities is. It's incredibly valuable in a dollar sense. It's incredibly valuable in a strategic sense. And I think we went through this journey where universities, research institutes thrive on openness, thrive on sharing information, and that was used against them. That was their underinvestment in the security of their networks means they were basically open for data theft. The willingness to engage openly through international networks meant that human beings were targeted, and what that resulted in is really substantial theft of intellectual property out of companies, research institutes, which has fueled the race for advantage, for dominance of emerging technology. That is by no means finished. It is happening today. Australian institutes, Australian businesses, organisations are being targeted. Areas like biotechnology, where you might have really small firms because the barriers to entry of that technology have come down substantially, are targets for that sort of attack. So I think it is a critical area of future geostrategy. As I said, these shouldn't be thought about as technical issues. These are geopolitical issues where we're all targets, we're all invested in the outcome. So it's crucial to think about how it applies to our daily work, our daily lives.
Thanks, Brendan. This is not very good. Alana, that's a nice segue to the areas that you've been focusing on at the centre, particularly thinking about conflict in the region in a broader way than just hard conflict. So I wonder, could you talk to us a little bit about how you see the region? Are we actually entering a new kind of arms race? And if so, what does that look like?
Yes, we are in an arms race, and Brendan actually stole some of my talking points, but I will press on. Yes, we are in an arms race. When it comes to conflict and the way that technology has evolved, if you can't beat a country in open conflict, then you can try and undermine it from within, essentially. Technology has changed conflict and geostrategic competition because it can be used to target our critical infrastructure or our financial institutions. It can undermine democratic processes, all of these sorts of things. And so when you think about conflict in the battlefield, it used to be thought about in terms of sea, air, land. It's sort of first and foremost now in the information space. The battlefield is in the information space. Obviously, real world physical conflict is still happening, but that is all there. The information operations that are involved are often a precursor or happen simultaneously. So that will always be some kind of element to it now. That then leads to this really major competition. It leads to this arms race, so to speak. If you're in a battle for security, economic or military supremacy or dominance that is facilitated or enabled by digital tools, then you want to make sure that you have a monopoly on the supply and the innovation of those tools. That that's exactly what we're seeing. It's similar to previous arms races that have happened, except this time we're not talking about nuclear weapons. This time we're talking about things like quantum. We're talking about AI, surveillance technologies, autonomous systems, drones, robotics, all of those kinds of things as well. They have become really important in warfare at the moment, particularly, I mean, the Russia-Ukraine conflict has just revolutionised things in a really horrific way. It's important to then understand why that's relevant to WA. And Brendan touched on this in his speech already. I think there are two key things that really put us at the centre of this competition. The first is our natural resources. We have everything in the ground that everyone else wants for technology, research, development and manufacturing, as well as a really mature mining and resources sector. And the second thing is AUKUS. It really puts WA in a much more prominent position on the global stage, which we're probably not very accustomed to. And so that means that WA businesses are now operating in a much more complex and high stakes environment. And it's going to take a lot of adjusting for especially small and medium-sized enterprises.
If I can just add an anecdote of my own, I've been really struck while you've been speaking, Brendan and Alana, this idea of risk versus cost, and everyone in Australia now is having to think about if something's cheap, why is it cheap? What are the risks? When I was the Australian ambassador in Mauritius during COVID, what should have been a big controversy but was not, was that the Chinese government had gifted the country 4,000 Huawei smart city cameras that were set up all over the island, and it's probably one of the lowest crime rate countries in Africa.
So generous.
No, so generous. No one's worried about that. That's a really extreme example, but all the points you're making, are absolutely true to West Australian business, the public sector. I've got lots of. This is a popular event. I have around 20 questions pre-submitted, but I'm going to package up one of them, which was a really constant theme through all of them, which was around how we navigate cyber threats and our relationship with the US. So two big questions. What does President Trump's administration mean for this, and Five Eyes cooperation and Pillar 2 and Pillar 1 cooperation on AUKUS? And then another part of that, how do we maintain our competitive edge given all the servers are based in the US? So there's a couple of bits to that, and I might ask you, Brendan, to address any bits that you want, and then Alana, any comments you want to make based on your experience.
Look, I think I'd start by saying there's a degree of unpredictability. I think we all follow the news, we all follow the developments in the US and the Trump administration, and we can see it as a time of massive change, massive disruption in their system. I think our cooperation, our partnership with the US has withstood political ructions, geopolitics over decades and decades. So the US as our primary, principal, most important security partner, I think maintains, sustains through this period. I think we can often get caught up in the day-to-day ructions, which are real, and there's a lot of real impact of those. But I think the core partnership we have with the US on security matters is as important as ever. Our cooperation with the US on cybersecurity is called the Five Eyes Partnership. As those of you who know the history, was built out of signal intelligence cooperation. So cybersecurity is not just central to the Five Eyes Partnership. It was actually the genesis of the Five Eyes Partnership. That continues to be the case today. We continue to cooperate with the US on cybersecurity work. Our Signals Directorate continues to cooperate around intelligence work. And we actually continue to see really strong partnership with the US in the region on better cybersecurity, where there's a lot of changes to US foreign aid approach, but we're currently today working with the US government on with the Philippines on basically coordinating on how we better support cybersecurity in the Philippines. US companies are so deeply embedded in our technology world. To your point around servers, data centers, we live in a American technology ecosystem. When you look at the phones that are in your pocket, the hardware that you have sitting on your desk at home or in your office, the software that's running all the programs that you use. These primarily US-based technology innovations and products and services, and that's been a really incredible and positive thing. So that will continue to be a part of it. A lot of US hyperscalers, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, have massive data centre presences in Australia, largely in Sydney. A lot of our most important data is stored on those servers. There are a lot of access controls that data centres and hyperscalers will put around your data. So if you say, if you're an Australian government client, I want my data housed under these configurations in this location, they will do that. And we have what's called the hosting certification framework, where we assess that data center cloud companies are complying by our expectations. Public cloud is often a global network run in different geographic locations. It is still, the importance of cloud security, I think, is something that hyperscalers do take seriously. Those of you, some of you might be familiar with the report of the Cybersecurity Review Board in the US, I think early last year or the year before, which criticised Microsoft for failures in its cloud security, which jeopardised its customers' data. In a direct way that you rarely see a government report say, this company has failed to deliver on the security that its customers expect. That was a wake-up call for Microsoft. It was a wake-up call for other hyperscalers that the importance of data security, of cloud security, is paramount. So I think, yes, there are a lot of ructions, there's a lot of change, but there is a core of our cybersecurity partnership. There is a core of more prioritisation on protecting our data. That means that we don't need to, there's no panic stations, I guess.
I will add a couple of quick thoughts. So I think it's important to understand that the Trump administration, they have shifted gears when it comes to tech regulation and cybersecurity. But that doesn't mean they're soft on tech regulation and cybersecurity. So, I mean, President Trump signed a new act into law just a couple of days ago called the Take It Down Act, which is around revenge porn, and that is, they've essentially criminalised it. And so, sorry, I should clarify, around generative AI manufactured revenge porn. So that has been criminalised in the US. It's been signed into law just in the past few days. And so that's not cybersecurity specifically, but it's a very recent example of where they actually are taking action. And it's astonishing to see Congress pass any law. So, this is a really positive signal that they are willing to regulate tech, which people assume because of the whole tech bro sort of optics that they're just not going to regulate. Well, they are, because they are regulating in some areas. In terms of cybersecurity, people are sort of thinking that because they're sort of dismantling CISA, maybe they're not going to be doing defensive cyber anymore. I mean, we're still really early days into all of that. We do know that they're ramping up offensive. So that will continue to evolve almost, every day over the course of the administration. And so I think what they are doing with cybersecurity in terms of the government's activities is going to look really different by the time we reach the end of the current term. I also just want to do a quick plug. I brought products. So one of Brendan's and my former colleagues, Adam Dobell, wrote a really great paper for us, Cybersecurity under Trump 2.0, Implications for Australia. I know quite a few of you would have picked up one on the way in. It is probably a little out of date, given it was written it was published in March, and obviously a lot has happened since March. But he was right with some of his predictions. So I really recommend having a read of that. And if you didn't grab one out there, they're online as well. Yeah.
I'm going to go to the audience in a little bit for questions, but I just wanted to take the chair's advantage of a couple more to the panel. Brendan, you've talked about Australia's defensive cyber capabilities, and Alana just mentioned it now. Is there anything that you want to say about offensive cyber capabilities and where you see the trajectory of cyber threats to Australia?
So Australia's had a declared offensive cyber capability for several years now. We've publicly talked about using it against terrorist groups like ISIS in the Middle East. I think we should be really proud in Australia of the capability we've built in the Australian Signals Directorate. I do think the preeminent focus, though, if you are looking to withstand the increasingly complicated world of cybersecurity, digital security, what's the most important thing? I do think defence resilience is the most important focus. So thinking about how you as a company, you as an agency have invested in your cybersecurity, what your technology procurement decisions are looking like. But increasingly what we say to people is, don't just ask your ICT shop, right, are we good? Have we, we've thought about cybersecurity, like this has been a priority? And they say, yeah, we're good, we've looked after it. Everyone is vulnerable to attack. So the question is, okay, tonight, 4 a.m, we get hit by a major ransomware attack or some sort of disruptive cyber attack. What do we do next? How do we recover? And that's kind of the nature of resilience. How do you recover? Everybody should assume they will be subject to a cyber attack at some point and needs to think about what do we do when that happens. For instance, if the only copy of your business continuity plan is stored on your network and then your network is lost, what do you do then? Do you have the right phone numbers? Do you know how to get onto the cybersecurity centre? So I do think we can, and the conversation globally talks a lot about offensive cyber capability. I think in a more complicated world, that's a really important tool of national power, but it's one that is used very judiciously. It is one that has very prescribed circumstances under which it's used. So it's important to invest in that, but ultimately I think what will keep Australia safe and resilient in this coming era, it's investing in our own capability, it's withstanding cyber attacks, it's being prepared to recover from them. And always coming back to most cyber attacks succeed because of basic vulnerabilities. So before we get too kind of focused on the sophisticated type of things, the circumstances under which we use offensive cyber, let's think about, well, more than 90% of cyber attacks, it's estimated, succeed because of really basic vulnerabilities, i.e. there was a patch released by the company and you didn't apply it because it was inconvenient because you were in the middle of doing something. You didn't use multi-factor authentication, you used recycled passwords, credentials stuffing, people clicked on the wrong link. These cyber tools, and I'm guilty of focusing on the more sophisticated developments in cyber capability, but most attacks succeed because of stuff that was around 20 years ago. You don't need to use your sophisticated zero-day exploit because you can get away with using the same tool you used back in 2005. So that for me remains the most important priority.
I mean, one of the a common theme in the questions, in a very genuine way was, well, all my data's on Google, and so what is there left to protect? And I think it's become pretty clear from your comments that there is so much there to do. The ASIO Director General's National Threat Assessment this year actually specifically called out Western Australia as a prime target. So I guess before I'm inviting the audience to think of questions, and before I throw to the audience, Alana, is there any other comments that you would give to Western Australian business to think about?
Yeah. In terms of local businesses in WA, small, medium, large, whoever, when we're talking about cybersecurity, what we're really talking about here, I think, is the intersection of technology, geopolitics, and business resilience. It's really important for businesses to understand what's going on in the world. Small and medium-sized enterprises in WA need to understand that they're part of a larger national security ecosystem. they are often seen as soft entry points into bigger networks. For example, if your business does work for a larger defence contractor, let's say you're getting on the AUKUS gravy train, you could be subject to a supply chain attack because I think you said soft underbelly earlier. That's exactly it. Hitting the weaker link in order to get to the stronger one. I will give, I've got a really good example of this, and I know a few people have heard me tell this story probably several times, so bear with me for those who have heard it before. But in 2016, there was a 50-person Australian company, defence subcontractor. They were hacked. The attacker stole about 30 gigabytes worth of sensitive data. In that data were plans for the F-35 fighter jet, Poseidon surveillance plane, and Navy ship designs. Pretty major breach. That attack was able to happen really quickly because they hadn't updated their software and they were using admin as a password.
Such a good password.
So if you're a defence subcontractor, please don't do that. But that's the reality of the situation that we're in, right? People in WA tend to have a bit of a relaxed approach to life and don't care too much for geopolitics, but it's these big things that are happening in the world that are impacting you being able to run your small business. Being small doesn't make you invisible online, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It can make you actually a really attractive target. You have really valuable data. You've got business plans, client information, financial details, product designs, really valuable intellectual property, and yeah, you'll quite often be the first port of call for anyone trying to steal things. Being aware of that connection already does put you ahead though. You can watch out for the signs and protect your interests. Awareness means that you won't necessarily dismiss those red flags. And it's, I think, really important to remember that the threats are real, but so are the solutions. And Brendan already mentioned them, using really straightforward security measures, things like multi-factor authentication and just training your people. These types of measures are often low cost or even free. So we really don't have any excuse for not using them.
Really having trouble with this microphone this afternoon. I wanted to open it up to the audience now for questions. I've got a couple of colleagues who are roving around with microphones. Let me give you some advance warning before we go to questions. I grew up in a pub in Kalgoorlie and I'm very good at tackling people. So should the questions turn into a half-hour treatise, you might find out about my origins, but I know that there's no one like that in the audience. But I want to go to the Chancellor first for comments.
It's actually nice to be a Chancellor because you do get to go first sometimes. And this is a really cheeky question. So, Brendan, and you'll hear my agenda as soon as the words come out of my mouth. But I was very struck when you talked about the very fact that the openness and sharing of information, which is so critical to university research and so many activities here, makes us very vulnerable. And you said that and Lana backed you up, most of the things that we need to do right now to really protect ourselves are very simple. Do you have a view on the use of USB sticks? And there are people in this audience who know exactly why I'm asking this question because we've talked about it a bit.
Look, I mean, it's a real, that's a real vulnerability. We've seen, to cite an anecdote, one of, and I can't remember which cyber attack this is. If you Google it, you'll find it. I think the Iranians wanted to get into a US military base, and so just left USB sticks lying around in the car park. And of course, people find a USB stick, they think, I wonder what's on this. Stick it in the drive. It is, if you want to, at scale, import malicious code into a device, a USB stick is perfect, right? There's none of those kind of firewalls that you have in place in the digital world. So there's a reason why in the Australian government you basically cannot use a USB under any circumstances. I don't even think we have ports available. Now, there's a technology upgrade there, right? There's not to say there isn't cost. USB sticks were super convenient. They used to hand them out for free at conferences and stuff. You know, terrible idea to take them. But with cloud computing, as annoying as OneDrive is for those who use it, you've got other ways to use it. Email systems have protections built in. I think if you can move away from some of your most obvious vulnerabilities like USB sticks, which transfer between devices, taking a USB from a home device to a work device, easy way to spread an exploit. I think they're kind of bad news in this day and age.
Can I add? Please don't scan random QR codes. Just while we're talking about USB sticks and just people being a bit snap happy, please don't scan random QR codes unless you know where it's going to.
And I'm very remiss because the team told me that I have to restate the questions for the online audience, but I think it's pretty clear from Brendan's answer that question was about USB sticks. Can we go to, I think there was a question from the lady in the middle of the row, and I'm going to briefly restate it, I'll remember.
Thank you. Dr. Kanika Rakhra, I'm a professor from India, and this is my first time in Australia. So please excuse me my ignorance for some questions. So I have two questions. One was the ambassador mentioned about 2 ransomware attacks that had happened that you trace back to the Chinese PLA, and you also mentioned that with the Chinese as well. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on the impact of that engagement. How did the Chinese react to your assessment, and whether that had any impact on Australia-China engagement in the later years once you mentioned that? Sorry.
Yep, go.
The second question was something that's a little bit discussed in terms of Western Australia and AUKUS and how that's impacting Western Australia. India banned Huawei and its sort of engagement. It's something that was also mentioned where, you know, you have all of these equipment and signals that are completely under Huawei. And I had recently a chance to actually visit the Huawei Center in China, and the fact that they're doing research on so many levels, and they've sort of engaged with Africa and Western, the Middle East in a very significant way. I was wondering how Western Australia in particular and Australia in general is engaging with all of these engagements in terms of AUKUS developments that are happening.
So just for our online audience, one question on how China reacted to Australia's attribution of ransomware attacks, and then how we view Huawei's engagement with Africa and other developing countries.
So, as I said, we've publicly attributed several times over the last couple of years Chinese actors associated with the Chinese state who've conducted malicious activities. And I get my language careful there, because sometimes they could be private sector actors, they could be non-government groups that are working to service the end of the state, or working on behalf of the state, or paid by the state. I think, generally speaking, and I'll just comment from my recollection of kind of open source commentary, China will, after we make those types of public attributions, China has said that they are a benevolent power in the region, that they're only looking to support good cybersecurity, that they deny conducting those types of attacks, and that it is malicious rumours conducted by the Five Eyes Australia at the behest of the US. There's some relatively regular talking points, I think, that we've seen. What I would say is we make public attributions very carefully. The amount of technical work that goes into having a high degree of confidence, and that's our signals directorate does that technical work. If we make a public attribution of that nature, we are watertight confident on the source of those attacks, and if we aren't confident, then we don't make the attribution. So generally speaking, there's kind of exchange of words in the public domain. I won't go into our private diplomatic conversations between the two governments, but that's how it has played out publicly generally. I think the question of infrastructure, particularly in places like Africa, but also in Asia, is a really, really important one. We do a lot of advocacy around technology security, but we expressly don't say to another country, you should do this and not that, or you should buy equipment or infrastructure from this company and not from that company. What we do say, and the 5G example where Australia limited high-risk vendors in our 5G network was, we say, you know, and I'll sort of simplify a little bit, but 5G telecommunications networks are so foundational to everything. They're so, and we haven't yet seen kind of the fully mature 5G networks that will be rolled out over coming years. But they're in our homes, our businesses, telecommunications are as critical infrastructure as you get. We made the assessment that in a 5G network, if you had access to any part of the network, you had access to all parts of the network. That means you could access any data across the network if you didn't adhere to information security provisions, and that you could disrupt, disable, turn off the network at a time of your choosing. Our decision was informed by what we called extrajudicial, another word I struggle to say, interference, which the example, China's not the only place where this is a concern, but this is a concern that China's national security laws obligate private companies to act on behalf of the government if they are directed to do so. So our assessment was, if 5G is so crucial to our infrastructure, our information, we cannot have any foreign government interfering with what is that core infrastructure. When we talk to countries in Asia and in Africa, what we say is that here is why we made that decision, and essentially it was about our information security and our sovereignty. You make your own decision. We are happy to share our policy framework, our legislative framework that enabled us to do so. But essentially, this is for every government to take a decision based on their sovereign national interests. We'll inform that decision. As I said, I think a big challenge for the globe is there is still a trade-off between affordability and security. So we might say, for example, we think the security of an Ericsson 5G network is superior to alternatives. Ericsson can be more expensive. So for an African nation looking where its primary goal is how do I connect even my most remote citizens, that might not be feasible to use that. So that's a big problem for us globally, that getting affordability and security in that digital infrastructure is too often a trade-off. What we've done in this region, particularly in the Pacific, is fund digital infrastructure projects by trusted providers. That means we work with Google on cable connectivity between Pacific Islands. At the moment, we're supporting cloud projects with trusted vendors in the region. The Digicel acquisition in the Pacific, where the Australian government supported Telstra to acquire that network, which means they're now using trusted vendors in their 5G network. We have felt it is of sufficient foreign policy importance that we've stepped in to make sure countries have access to trusted technology. We can't do that everywhere, but I think that does show the importance of it to us.
Lots of questions. Paul in the middle next to Paddy. Melinda. Melinda knows where you are, and then I'll come to I know that I can see all the hands, so please raise them again in a minute.
Following on from there, a bit of a provocative question.
I was worried about this.
Because you know I was going to throw something at you, Brendan. So the 2017 sort of era was all about 5G.
Yep.
Is this decade's version of 5G BYD EVs?
For those online, is this era's version of 5G risks BYD electric vehicles?
I think that's a great question. I think connected vehicles are... So everything that's connected is vulnerable, right? So there's a big focus on connected vehicles, EVs. What we need to think about is how do we make
kind of conscious decisions around anything that's connected. Cars are important. You plug your phone into your car. So suddenly your car, if you've got a connected vehicle, has access to all the data on your phone. So you might not think, well, my car's got a lot of personal data that I need to worry about. You might not think that, your mileage is too valuable, but have a think about your phone. So if you're worried about kind of connectivity there, have a think about what type of car you're buying, and if the data on your phone is potentially important to you, then how that decision should inform your purchase. I sort of think the other part of cars, of course, is if a malicious actor wanted to interfere with tens of thousands of cars on the road, that could be a pretty bad day for the nation. I think connected vehicles are important, but I actually think what is the 5G of the next few decades is actually data centres and cloud computing, because that's everything we connect, including vehicles, kind of connects through data systems and the cloud. And I think we haven't globally thought about the security of those systems. We've got caught up in ideas of data localization, where we said, if a data centre is in Sydney, then we're good. So forgetting about the fact that the data centre is connected globally. So I actually think as everything becomes digital, as everything becomes connected, we need to think about the security of our data centres. We need to think about who's operating those data centres, what the access controls are, and that's a message we give to a lot of countries in the region who are digitising their government, who are connecting, moving government processes and information onto digital systems. Think about where you're housing that data, and I think that there's not that many. We're not quite in the same monopolisation that we saw in 5G, but there's actually not that many kind of affordable data centre operators and hyperscalers out there. So we again end up in that kind of concentration risk where if we're talking about trusted vendors, there's not that many trusted vendors out there. So one, I think that's a real risk, and two, I was trying to sort of dodge too much of the connected vehicle question, because I think it's a really hard one that we are not globally, and in Australia, I don't think we figured out what the right way forward is yet.
Alana.
I think it's you can't emphasise enough just how much data tech companies collect. Even just in the iPhone alone, it knows when you get in and out of your car because it can tell the difference in the atmospheric pressure. It knows when you sit down, it knows when you stand up, it knows when you put your phone down to go to the toilet. It knows everything, and it captures all of that data and it stores it. Apple's pretty good with encryption, but phones, anything that has any kind of connectivity, it is capturing an enormous and astronomical amount of data. And so if you're driving around in a connected vehicle, that vehicle's got cameras in it, that vehicle's got speakers in it, it's got microphones in it, it's got sensors, it's got GPS, it's got, it has so much technology in it, and there's no way that we could possibly know everything that's in that car. So I cannot stress how cautious you have to be when you're buying something like an EV and thinking about where that's coming from and what technology might be in it. I think similar to that, data centers is definitely a big one. Another kind of like 5G moment for me at the moment that I'm thinking about are two things: surveillance technology. There are nation states who have commercialised it, so governments who are selling and exporting surveillance technology across our region, and including to spy on diaspora in Australia. Then the other thing is unmanned like aerial devices, drones, and things like that, and the more autonomous systems. If you are a hobbyist photographer and you've got a drone and you're taking photos down in Rockingham, down near I live, you're inadvertently taking images of HMAS Sterling and all of the development work that's happening on the island at the moment. And if that is a certain drone made by a certain company that's connected to a certain government, then there's no telling what data that is actually sending back to people. We don't want them to have that information. So that is probably the other 5G moment for me.
I'm feeling that I'm kind of happy about my phone also throwing up knitting projects for me just to take my mind off all the things that are going on in the world. I want to go to the front row, the gentleman in the front row.
Prashant here. It was very interesting to understand your perspective on the world, and the world is very changing. And what Alana mentioned, what written in March is already outdated. The speed of the velocity of change in technology is immense, and the regulation and the things we're doing, it's always catch up. There's always that gap that the government has to fill in. But also, I'll put a focus back on resiliency again. If you go back a couple of years and couple of months, some of the big events which brought our country to the knees was not cyber attack. It's about our own telco resiliency. Optus, BGP routers, routing table got us in trouble, and half of the country was not able to do any communication. Our payments, our electronic systems, our FPOS system, everything was stopped. Now, a foreign company can wash their hand and can say, you know what, we are a foreign country, you're operating Optus as a brand here. What is their liability and responsibility? Same thing with CrowdStrike, they brought the whole globe down in terms of what they did. It was not a cyber attack. And also, if you go back a couple of weeks ago, we see Chinese vessels circumnavigating Australia. Now, one of the key thing for cyber is, for digital, is about resiliency in our undersea cables. 98% of our traffic goes through those subsea cables, and we know only there is 75 repair vehicle ships available in the globe at any time, and they're not available maybe in our time zone. So as a nation, because of our nature that we are an island country, we are predisposed to a lot of those conditions, which really bad and worse because we are Australia, because we are isolated. So how we can build that capacity back and how we can build the resiliency. And we're not talking big cyber attack here. We're just talking basic infrastructures and resiliency.
How do we build basic resilience in our infrastructure?
I think you cited some really important and useful examples. The Optus technical outage, I feel since COVID, I cannot pinpoint moments in time in the past. But we all sort of remember that was a catastrophic outage, right? Where millions of Australians could not make phone calls because of a technical outage. As you say, it was not a cyber attack, but did give us an insight into, if that was a cyber attack, how vulnerable we were, how many hours it took Optus to get back up and running. I think rightfully the thing that was focused on at the time, and which I believe Optus was subject to some major fines, was that people were not able to dial 000. I mean, that's as fundamental a failure as you'll ever see in a telco outage, that people cannot dial the police or ambulance services. I think there's a real lesson that we're not as resilient as we thought we were. For example, the system was supposed to be designed that a 000 call will bounce to the next available network. That didn't happen. That system, that's resilience right there, bounce to the next available network. That doesn't happen. You failed in your resilience there. CrowdStrike, super interesting example. I think for years we've been talking about Microsoft is as critical global infrastructure as you can get. Microsoft is in everything. We are all entirely reliant on Microsoft Office products, other Microsoft products. The CrowdStrike outage, again, a technical issue, not a cyber attack. CrowdStrike is a premium cybersecurity company, very trusted throughout the world, affected 1% of Microsoft devices globally, and you had people stranded in airports. You had basic functions not happening. Affected Australia. I spent that evening, I remember it was a Friday evening, on the phone to a number of Pacific Island nations who were affected by the CrowdStrike outage and didn't. The technical solution was actually super simple, but people didn't have access to that information. Again, a real wake-up call for our national resilience about concentration risk, how reliant we are on certain products and services. I think that question of reliance also applies to your point around undersea cables. I think people would probably be alarmed if they knew how small the number of subsea cable connections are that Australia relies on for our entire internet connectivity. So there are serious questions of national resilience. What I'd say in Australia is we have a greater focus on these issues than most governments that I spend my time talking to. The term national resilience has been an important term in Australia for several years now. We've recognised the issues of dependency. I think the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act, which basically says you need to think about your resilience if you run critical infrastructure. The establishment of a critical infrastructure centre in the Department of Home Affairs shows how seriously we take that question. And out of CrowdStrike, globally at the federal government level, there's a lot of work now going on to say, well, let's apply that type of incident to other sectors. How do we think it'll play out? I'm a big fan of exercising. Exercising tells you what you don't know and what you've got wrong in a simulated scenario rather than a real scenario. Every time we do them, we find things that we're not prepared for. So bad news is resilience in the digital world is limited by that concentration risk, by us not being as well prepared as sometimes we hope we are. The good news is this is a serious focus, I think, in Australia in a way that it's not elsewhere. And I apply that at the state government and federal government level. I apply that at the private sector level for critical infrastructure. We talk about it more, we do more, we prepare more. Hopefully that stands us in good stead with those types of failures.
We're coming up against time, and I know there's lots of questions, so I just wanted to ask 2 questions to be packaged up. If the lady at the front and then the gentleman at the back, I'll ask for you to put your questions one after the other, and then I'll throw back to the panel.
So my question was about the intersection of AI and cyber. So with AI, we've got machines smarter than humans, perhaps. We've got deep fake. And it just seems to me the combination of those two is much, much bigger than each individually, and they'll interplay. And how does that, what's happening about that?
Thank you. And a question at the second row at the back.
Hi, I'm Tejas from Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in India. My question, I'll keep it really short. What are the opportunities and challenges for Australia in cooperating on cybersecurity under the Quad?
Great. So a question on what does AI mean for cyber and opportunities for Australia cooperating with the Quad on cyber?
AI is glorious and terrifying all at the same time. I love AI, I use it every day, but it does scare the pants off me. A report actually just came out that one of the new model that OpenAI are training at the moment actually bypassed a shutdown instruction. So the trainers or the people who are working on this AI model told it to shut itself down, and it didn't. It basically changed the script. That's scary for a lot of reasons, like let's just unplug it, shall we? In terms of how it intersects with cybersecurity, I mean, it's the same internet, right? It's the same internet, it's just got some shiny new functions. We don't really understand how they work. It's incredibly complex to get on the front foot, especially from a government perspective. It's incredibly complex to try and regulate a technology that you don't understand, and a technology that's really still in its infancy. I think that we need to... There's also a bit of a, in terms of cybersecurity, connection to that arms race that we're talking about before, right? There are models that we trust and there are models that we don't trust. When it comes to AI or algorithms, anything like that, it's only as good as the code that it's written with. Some are really good, some are not. And so, you know, if I'm using an AI model, let's say I want to do some research, I'm not going to use DeepSeek because I personally won't trust the information that it's been trained on. I won't trust the outputs that it's giving me. So yeah, it's complex, and there's no sort of simple way to capture it neatly about how those two things relate. And I'm just rambling, so I'll give to Brendan.
Well, I think Alana made a really good point there. AI is software code, right? So there's a lot of hype cycle around AI, but ultimately it is software that is being designed and written. Your point around the black box nature of AI is right. It's been designed and written in a way that sometimes it's kind of hard to understand. I don't think AI, I think we overestimate its capabilities in some way. So not to say that we shouldn't be worried about that type of scenario and the capabilities. I don't think AI is smarter than humans. I think it's probably a long way off. I think we got distracted by the whole kind of AGI sort of notion, artificial general intelligence, that AI will be this kind of self-propagating, self-controlling kind of nature. We can make design choices which control for some of those risks. Do I think AI companies are doing enough to red team, to test, to think about those risks? Absolutely not. They again, we're repeating the mistakes we made with software, with social media, where technology companies rush products to market without testing them, without thinking them through. And we sometimes buy into the myth in government that technology moves so fast, how can we possibly keep up? The technology company loves that myth. They say, bureaucrats, you don't know what you're talking about, you don't know what you're doing, don't worry, we got this. They don't got this. We need to be more confident in the way that we approach regulation. We need to say that fundamentally, the issues of transparency, testing, knowing what data, visibility to outside researchers, those are all things that can be applied at any phase of technology to any kind of technology, and that's the type of regulatory approach that protects against some of those downside risks.
Yep.
I'll say one final thing on AI and cybersecurity. I think when you talk about AI risks and you worry about existential risks, sometimes we lose track that there are real risks today, and that AI is being used to generate malicious code. It's really good at that. It basically takes months of labour. The same labour saving that Alana's doing in her job, malicious actors are doing the same labour saving with code generation. And you used to be able to identify spear phishing emails because of spelling mistakes, because it looked weird. It just wasn't right. AI means that's not the case anymore. So we are so much more vulnerable to that type of phishing attack today because of the use of generative AI to generate spear phishing emails.
I just wanted to add, actually, on the rush to market issue, and that's a really, it's a really important thing to understand about, particularly how the US-based tech industry work. There's this kind of like age-old saying, or as old as Silicon Valley is anyway, that Mark Zuckerberg used to love, and that's move fast and break things, right? They move fast, they like to be disruptors, they like to innovate, be disruptors, they like to push this technology out on the world, and they don't care about the implications as long as it's making them money. If there are legal consequences later down the track, they will deal with it when they arise, right? Not all tech companies are like that. There are some really fantastic tech companies out there who want to do good in the world. You know, Google's saying used to be, I don't think they use it anymore, but it used to be do no harm. So there are companies out there who want to do the right thing by humanity and society, but a large part of Silicon Valley and, you know, the companies that sort of make up the Bay Area, very much, let's just push this out and see what happens.
Yeah.
We're coming up to time, so Brendan, I'm going to ask for your thoughts on the quad, and then I'm going to give you the final word as well. Any final take-home messages you want to leave with the audience?
Great. Quad, firstly, I love Carnegie. Carnegie India is, I think, a really impressive think tank. I was recently at the Global Tech Summit, which was a great event. I think cyber and tech security is one of the areas the Quad can really lean in on. The Quad was set up to demonstrate tangible value to the Indo-Pacific. When you look at the grouping of Quad countries, you have this incredible kind of comparative advantage. You have from India some of the greatest software engineering, the workforce capability, that's the envy of the world. From the US, you have the most innovative tech sector that humanity's ever created. Japan has incredible digital infrastructure capability, and Australia, I think, has, we're a smaller player compared to those other three, but we are a world leader in technology adoption. We have the critical minerals that are crucial for hardware development. We have an incredible research sector when it comes to digital technologies, AI, quantum. So we sort of don't compete amongst each other in the Quad. We're actually super complementary. And in terms of offering value to the region, trusted technology vendors from Quad countries being more present, more available, more affordable in the Indo-Pacific, easy win. Cloud computing, data centres, cables, that's already been a focus of the Quad, that will continue to be a focus. Countries in the region need our support for a more cyber secure region in terms of setting, one, the technology being available, but two, setting the rules and norms and standards around a safer technology world. The Quad can be a real leader in that. We're cooking up a lot of ideas of what the next phase of the Quad will look like and bring to this, but cyber and tech will be a really core part of that work, is my expectation.
And any take-home final point that you want to make with the audience before we close?
I think really fantastic questions, attendance really great. I think to Alana's point that WA has a particular set of capabilities, skills, resources when it comes to the next phase of digital technology. I think WA really leans into that. The opportunities are boundless. Getting the security settings right, and it's not to say, to go back to the point the Chancellor sort of emphasised, openness, collaboration, super important. But it's just about doing that in a mindful and thoughtful way. Thinking about, well, are our networks secure? Who are we collaborating with? None of this should say we should do less of what makes us great, that we should do less of kind of the good things that Australia brings to this world. But I do think being more thoughtful about it, not seeing this as a technical issue, thinking about how what you do sits within a broader geopolitical context, how you think about your cyber and tech security. That's something everyone can do. And as always, don't be afraid. You're only ever a podcast away from being a technology expert.
So, colleagues, one of the great pleasures of this job is being part of these really fascinating discussions, but also being part of this really incredible community that is connected to the Perth US Asia Centre. Thank you all for your really excellent questions and engagement. We hope that you'll continue to engage with us. If you're new to the centre, please take some of our publications, come to more of our events. And can I ask you please to join me in thanking Brendan and Alana. And there's refreshments outside for those who can stay.